The next presentation will be the paper will be presented by Elisabeth Lord. Elisabeth is a senior environmental engineer and has a degree in chemical engineering, a master's in air pollution management, and has over 18 years of experience in air quality and all air consulting services. And today, Elisabeth will present a new approach to odor impact assessment based on an hybrid methodology of field measurements, source sampling, and dispersion learning. Thank you. The next presentation will be the paper will be presented by Elisabeth Lord. Elisabeth is a senior environmental engineer and has a degree in chemical engineering, a master's in air pollution management, and has over 18 years of experience in air quality and all air consulting services. And today, Elisabeth will present a new approach to odor impact assessment based on an hybrid methodology of field measurements, source sampling, and dispersion learning. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for being here. My slide is with air and odor. I could have put it for Scentroid as well. Work with Scentroid now, so but still, as an independent consultant prior to this, I was using Scentroid, which is why our teaming up. So I'm sorry, I apologize for the background, the layout. And now I'm here to present a distinctive approach to odor impact assessment. It's based on a hybrid methodology of field measurements, source sampling, and dispersion modeling. Now, conducting an odor impact assessment, you have an industrial site. It could be any industries. This is an example of wastewater treatment plant. It could be an asphalt plant, pulp and paper, petroleum refineries. It could be anything. The thing is, you have several different types of sources. They all smell something different. Wastewater treatment plant will smell totally something different from the screening to the sludge to the end waters. It grows and evolves. So how do you characterize that? How do you get to assess these odors? Typically, and we've seen it with the previous presentations, you do source characterizations through sampling, olfactometric analysis, and then you do dispersion modeling. And dispersion modeling generates maximum impacts, or the highest percentiles. Downsides of this type of analysis is that it doesn't study really the day-to-day impacts. What we were talking about the preceding presentations, what do the citizens really daily, what do they feel? It doesn't give you this. It only gives you the worst impacts over a 3 to 5 years range, because you use 3 to 5 years local meteorology. You only sample and characterize the known sources. You go on site, you talk to the managers, they point you which are the problematic areas, and that's what you do. But it doesn't give you the investigation of the real conditions. Source sampling is limited because it's only conducted once. There are many hypotheses applied when you do dispersion modeling. The turbulence is often minimized. You have small buildings, you have areas with water, you have different types of densities around the site, fugitives that are not assessed, tanks that are not modeled at buildings. So there's a lot of turbulence and hypotheses that are going on site that are not generated in dispersion modeling. So, and the synergy as well of odors is not taken into account, nor the intensities. And we were talking about that with the annoyance level of Professor Neisel. So the distinctive approach, the core element of this is to add the Odour Patrol program, do ambient monitoring. And then use a dispersion modeling, but not only to produce maximum impacts just for doing an assessment like that, but use it and actually study the real results and compare them to what you actually have observed in ambient air. So the main goal is to diagnose, do a real huge diagnosis of the odors, the sites, the sources, the fugitives. And then your diagnosis will help you develop a real and adapted mitigation plan. That's what doctors do. You have a patient and you really have to diagnose all of his problems, headaches, backache, stomach, heart, whatever. You have to diagnose everything, and then you prioritize everything, and then you can mitigate once by once and gradually improve all the situation. The goal is not just to analyze and assess. The goal is to develop mitigation. But you do that by a real diagnosis. And the real diagnosis is not just dispersion modeling back into your office by computer. It's go on site and measure ambient air. We've talked about it. We need values. We need quantities to quantify. Well, that's a basic distinctive approach, is to add that ambient measurement into the study. It helps qualify and quantify odors at different locations on-site and as well off-site in the neighborhoods. But you do need to work with the industry and go on-site and measure at different points on the fence line, but as well within the several areas. It allows setting baseline levels as well and provide full investigation of the site, source, and variabilities. Gets you a better understanding of the level of annoyance in normal conditions, not only at the maximum impacts, but normal conditions. Impacted areas and variances on site and beyond. Odor monitoring in relation with on-site operations, offsets, events, analysis of types of odors perceived. Is it just H2S? No, probably not. So what types of odors are you perceiving, and the annoyance level and all the intensities? This is what you get. Ambient Patrol, step 1 of the study, is conducted a minimum of 2 patrollers. This is just to give the same as you do duplicates when you sample, when you need 2 patrollers to get 2 reproducibility of your results, of your measurements. You monitor at established points, and you'll see them, like I said, fence line and different elaborate, but it always has to be the same points to get overall statistic data. At the peripheral of the site, various key sectors within the site, at distance beyond property. You record odor concentrations, and the odor concentrations are measured with the Scentroid SM100 ambient olfactometer. This is exposed in the Scentroid is exposing several of their equipment, but one of these is the SM100, a portable olfactometer, and I've personally used it several times, and it actually works quite well. I've used in the past, over my career, several other ambient olfactometers, and but this one is, I personally think, is quite reliable. Description of odor perceived. So the patrollers as well, they actually write down, okay, what's going on inside? What type of odors am I smelling? Is it gas? Is it heavy oil? Is it methane? Is it sludge? What is it? Local wind speed and direction measurements as well. So this is an idea of all the points that you can get, that you can have, that you can actually select. Nearby sources are the perimeters and within the source, and then just to assess, is it coming from this source or something else? Chemical compound concentrations is always a great value to add to this, to odor measurements. I don't think chemicals will actually tell you a lot of odors. Odors are a blend of many chemicals. If you taste a soup that has 50 different chemicals, you remove the garlic, it will still taste a lot. Tomatoes and whatever else, you remove the garlic and tomatoes, it will taste something different, but it always tastes anyway. So the same with odors. It's not just due to one chemical. So even though you measure 50 different chemicals, you won't get what it smells, what's its concentration, the intensity of it. But you'll actually have the list of ingredients, which is actually of great interest for mitigating devices afterwards. So valuable chemicals, and yeah, actually, you can also try to derive a tracer. Continuous monitoring of odors, it's not yet something that is ready to install, I believe. But you could probably try to find a chemical tracer that actually correlates with odor concentrations. Landfill sites, for example, it's not H2S. I've done that previously. It's not H2S. It'll be methane or VOCs. Most often, there are no correlations with H2S. Not for a landfill site, wastewater treatment plants, petroleum refineries, pulp and paper industry. All these 4 types of industries, they all say it's H2S. Well, none of them smell the same. So you have to find and research your chemical tracer. Now, Ambient Patrol will give, if you do like 3 days, 4 points, you have 3 columns. If you match them with wind, the wind that was actually at the time of your monitoring, you have different data. Depending on the location of where these points are, it actually, just for 3 days, it can give you an idea of which sources were problematic. And actually, was it coming from the site or from a neighbor? That also will tell you that. It can also give you some kind of indication of the turbulence on site. So only 3 days, 4 points. It actually gives you a lot of information. But if you do it over, let's say, a month, and even longer, a year if you can, you get some variabilities. All the 4 points, colors are matching 4 different points. And you can see the variability. And this actually is can give you some information, close and further away sources, ground sources or elevated source. And it will all give you a palpable hands-on the odor levels and sources that can achieve. I've done some studies where there were some points, it was supposed to be upwind from the greatest sources of the site, and then yet the baseline levels that were derived afterwards, you put it as percentiles, time series, and you get the curves, and then that upwind baseline level was actually about 30, 35 at the 75th percentile. I was like, there's something there. This is not upwind. Well, actually found some new and unknown sources from the managers. The process managers and environmental managers did not know about these sources. So we would never have monitored and measured and sampled them. So this actually gives you the 75th percentile medium and then the 98th percentile. On a nuisance level for citizens, 98th percentile, 99.5 percentile is actually justified because it's frequency that gives you the impacts. You get annoyed. The more frequent the odors, the more annoyed you are. But as an industry perspective, you see that most of the time it's under 10. Okay, there's a green line that's under 20, it's under 30, 80 at 85% of the time. But and then you have the last 10 percentiles that you peak. But then yet, the regulation very often peaks up the targets in 95, 98, 99.5 percentile. In case, on the industry's opinion, this is quite challenging to achieve. So this actually curves are setting very good information as to where to set the baseline levels for the industry. I personally very often like the 75th percentile. It's actually not too low, it's not the average, not median, but it actually allows some flexibility for turbulence and everything. And then you can actually, starting from the 75th percentile, you can actually start working towards improvements. But it's not something utopic that you'll never achieve. Correlation with air contaminants. I was talking to you about hardly any correlation with H2S. You see two different wastewater treatment plants. One is industrial and the other is sanitary. And you see the odor levels pretty much match, but H2S doesn't at all. So you get to odor sampling and effectometric analysis, and then dispersion modeling. Dispersion modeling, I think it has a lot of values. It helps you mostly to prioritize the sources, to get the extent of, I'll show you, I'm lack of a time here, so it shows you the contribution of impacts of each source and groups of sources. It gets you the impacts of elevated source, because ambient ground level monitoring is hard to actually get the impacts from elevated source. So source sampling is actually of great interest for that as well. And dispersion modeling, it indicates the distance of impacted areas, and it helps you do source prioritization for mitigation. However, you have to never forget that modeling does not blend. The synergy of odors is not taken into account. Dispersion modeling takes odor concentration as if they were particulate matter and accumulates them together. So with the Odour Patrol results, you can combine baseline levels, odor emissions, impacted areas, impacts from ground level sources, frequency of odors, level and types of odors. All of these types of information that you got from modeling in your office, it has to be matched with the Odour Patrol, your experience on site. And then you get a palpable indication. You go back on site and you see, okay, this is the case. And you go back and you visit the site with totally new eyes. And it helps you develop a mitigation plan. It has communication with third parties, population and regulatory agencies. It helps you have to prevent odor formation, control odor releases, and avoid the odor nuisance. The mitigation plan has to have a source prioritization, because you can't have a mitigation at once. It's a long-term, step-by-step process. So you need prioritize and say, okay, this time short-term, this may be not the highest, greatest source, but you can act quickly by using this solution. The big stack, the big source, well, it takes perhaps a couple of years. What do you do within that time? So short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions. But all of this mitigating plan developed and well adapted to that industry must be done with a great diagnosis before. You have to diagnose your patient. And that, for me, is the combination of ambient measurements, for sure, with all the rest. That's pretty much it.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive approach. Do we have some questions for Elisabeth? I've got one question. I think what is important in this one is just work with industrialists. First, because you need to access the site, so the proponent and that, but you need also just to explain to the proponent all the interest to have this approach for him in the future, just to mitigate and prioritize on this one. I think that's a key element in this approach. You have all the measurements you have to put in place, but the communication with the third party. And do you have also the community involved in this one, in one way or another, or not at all?
It's always good to have communication with the community. One, you get to get their field about, and then you can actually match also your, the consultant, the study itself has ambient measurements, real ambient measurements with the SM100, but the community, does it match? You go there and they are the one that are annoyed. And so what do they smell? The types of the odors, but as well when. Because then we can perhaps match timing with their observations, which is probably going to be the barbecue time or the early morning when you wake up. But it's also important to do it during the day to get the whole round by studying meteorological conditions as well. Then you can get, you can well assess and understand the situation. But yes, of course, communication with the community is highly important.
Because it wasn't clear in your value step that the community had not a key role, but a role in this one.
It's a key role for the assessment, but it's also a great essential role in mitigation, because communication, it just reduces the level of conflicts. Just that is a type of mitigation.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Simple one. What's the duration of your odor patrol? I'm just curious, what length of time did you use in order to get all of the numbers? Thanks.
Odors are, it's not like air contaminants. Air contaminants have to be measured over 15 to 1 hour, up to 24 hours measurements. Odors are instant measurements. So you have to take time to well measure, but it'll take 1 or 2 minutes just to do 1 point. You can do it several times, and then you switch. Depending on how many points you have, you can actually do 2 rounds per day. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. That's one of the ways to achieve more and more data. But odors are measured instantly, detected instantly, and that's how we do it as well for ambient patrol. Oh, the duration of the campaign, it depends on each projects are different. The more you get, the more data you get, the better it is, and you can actually do some drawings that I've done, like the percentile curves and everything. For 3 days, you can't really set up the baseline with the percentage level, percentile curves. I've personally conducted some projects that lasted a year long with daily patrols, but that's rare. As a minimum, a minimum of 3 days is great, especially if you can conduct them different seasons as well. If you can go back and get them different seasons. It's also great if the client actually at one point can purchase the apparatus and monitor himself. That's even, he can do that on his own without us anymore. Once they apply mitigation, then they can, but you have to do it, at the beginning, it can allow you to diagnose and understand the ambient levels, but the more you get into the data, the more you can set up baseline levels. It depends on the complexity of the site and everything, but a minimum of 3 days is up to a year.
Thank you, Elisabeth, for this presentation. I think we can have a round of applause. Thank you.